The rancher rode back without sending word ahead, only to find a site that didn't belong on his own land. His Apache wives were left outside, barred from entering by none other than his own brothers. As Boone Carter's horse crested the ridge he knew so well, he noticed something unsettling in the way light spilled from his home. It wasn't the hue of it nor the hour, but the way it fell unnaturally across faces that should never have been caught in shadow at midday. 2 women were huddled against the front door, as though they were strangers awaiting permission to enter a house that was rightfully theirs. What unsettled him most wasn't that they were forced outside. It was the way their eyes met his approach. They did not shine with comfort or relief, but with something sharper, something dangerously close to fear. His brothers had always held to a ritual whenever he returned from his trading runs. A welcome spoken the moment he arrived. Wade waiting on the porch, Sterling setting out coffee, and the front door wide and open. Today, none of that was true. The door was locked tight. Wade's figure appeared behind the glass, watching but not stepping out. Sterling finally emerged, but instead of carrying a pot of coffee, he gripped a rifle. "Boone!" Wade's voice carried through the pain, formal and stiff. "We need words." But first, he paused, his glance shifting toward the women seated by the door. "You've got to understand what's different now." Ayanna rose slowly, her hand steadying Takala's shoulder as she did. Her voice cut clean through the quiet air, sharp as a knife gliding through silk. "They know about the papers, Boone. The ones you buried in the cellar." She held Wade's gaze through the window. "They know the truth about what you were really trading for." But Boone had never hidden any papers. He had never placed a single document in his cellar. He hardly went down there at all. Sliding off his horse, he felt the familiar tug of the saddlebags, heavy with nothing more dangerous than silver coins and goods for barter. His mind raced backward through the past 3 days, purchases, negotiations, nights beneath an open sky. Routine, honest, ordinary. Nothing that could possibly explain this hostile welcome. Takala's whisper drifted across the yard, quiet but weighted like a prayer. "They said you sold our marriage papers?" "They said you never intended to return." The words struck harder than any blow. Boone's hand instinctively pressed against his chest, feeling for the small leather pouch he carried there, always close to his heart. Inside were the only papers that mattered. Tribal marriage documents binding him to Ayanna and Takala, recognized by law and custom alike. Proof he'd never part with. Proof of loyalty when the outside world doubted him. Wade's voice hardened. "Show us what's in those bags, brother. Show us what you really brought home." Sterling edged nearer to the window, his rifle never lowering. For the first time in Boone's life, his brother's weapon wasn't aimed at the ground, nor pointed harmlessly skyward. It was leveled at his chest. Ayanna's eyes locked with his, and in them he saw a terror that froze his blood. She wasn't just afraid of Wade and Sterling, she was afraid of what Boone himself might admit. As though she knew some hidden truth about these so-called cellar papers, something Boone himself did not. As though she already knew what his brothers expected to find when they rifled through his saddlebags. The worst realization crept in cold and merciless. Every person he loved seemed to know something he did not. And whatever that secret was, it threatened to tear down everything he'd built. The silence between them stretched, tight as rope about to fray. Boone eased open a saddlebag, each movement deliberate, visible so they'd see he hid nothing. Coins clinked as they scattered in the dust, flashing in the sunlight. Bundles of cloth, a sack of coffee beans, the common goods he always returned with. Nothing concealed, nothing dangerous, nothing to explain his wife's fear or his brother's mistrust. But Wade's expression remained unmoved, his jaw set harder. "That's not what we're after. And you know it." "I don't know anything," Boone answered, his voice sharper than he intended. "I've been gone 3 days. Same road as always, same trades as always." He gestured toward his wives. "What did you tell them?" "Why are they locked out of their own home?" Sterling shifted his stance, the rifle unflinching. "Because they aren't welcome anymore. Not after what we found." Takala rose suddenly, her small frame seeming to expand with fury. "Tell him about the visitor," she demanded, her voice firm. Her eyes didn't leave Boone, though her words were meant for Wade. "Tell him about the man who came here yesterday looking for him, the visitor." A chill coiled in Boone's gut. In all his years of trade, no one had ever tracked him to his home. His dealings were in town, fair and open. No man had ever followed him back to the ranch. At last, Wade stepped out onto the porch, but his rifle stayed in hand, held with grim purpose. The government agent had claimed he was chasing down stolen property. Said a man who looked just like Boone had sold them intelligence, specific details about Apache encampments. His tone dropped when he added that there was proof, documents hidden somewhere on this very land. The accusation was so outrageous that Boone nearly laughed in the man's face. Nearly. But when his eyes met Ayanna's, the humor drained away. She was studying him with the sharp focus of someone bracing for a lie, her expression carrying the weight of expectation, as if she already believed a denial was nothing more than performance. "I have never sold information about anyone," Boone said carefully, measuring each word. "I have never betrayed the people of my wives. I have never—" "Then explain the cellar," Sterling cut him off, his voice tight with accusation. "Explain why we found the ground disturbed down there when you've always sworn you never set foot beneath this house. Explain who's been digging if it wasn't you." Boone turned slowly to face his younger brother. The cellar entrance lay at the rear of the house, covered with thick wooden planks that had remained unmoved for as long as he'd owned the ranch. The man who sold him the property had once mentioned there was storage below, but Boone had never bothered to go down. He valued the wide sky, the sweep of open land. The thought of burying himself underground left him uneasy. "I've never been inside that cellar," he answered flatly. Wade's laugh cut through the air, sharp and bitter. "Then who has? Because someone's been down there. Someone who knows this land well enough to navigate it blind. Someone who had a reason to hide something where it wouldn't be found." Ayanna moved toward him then, her steps deliberate, her presence commanding. When she stopped just short of reaching out to him, her voice dropped to a low, trembling thread. "The government man knew things about our ways," she said. "Things no outsider should ever know. He spoke of sacred rituals, the words only the closest among us share. He knew the vows we exchanged, details of our wedding that only 3 people could ever carry." The weight of her words knocked the air from Boone's chest. 3 people. Himself, Ayanna, and Takala. Those traditions weren't shared. They were never written down, never spoken to anyone beyond the circle of marriage. The ceremonies were sacred, bound by secrecy and reverence. If the agent knew those things, then either Ayanna or Takala had broken their vow, or, worse still, someone else had been present. Someone had been watching from the shadows, intruding on the most private moment of their lives. The thought that he might have been living under surveillance, his life split between what he knew and what had been hidden from him, froze his blood. He hadn't yet gathered the strength to speak when Wade's expression shifted. The anger drained from his face, replaced by something far closer to fear. "We need to take you down there now," Wade said, his voice urgent, almost desperate. "Before others arrive." "Others?" Boone's eyes scanned the group. Each of them had gone quiet, their attention not on him but outward, straining toward the distance, listening for something more than the ordinary hush of afternoon. Sterling's rifle twitched as he lifted a hand and pointed west. A rising dust cloud blurred against the horizon, 3 riders closing fast. "We saw them from the porch," Sterling said. 10 minutes out at most." Ayanna's hand clutched Boone's arm, her grip fierce, her fear radiating through her touch. The government man had left them with a warning. He would return with officials. If Boone came back in the meantime, his brothers were instructed to hold him until the authorities arrived. The trap snapped shut with cold precision. Every scrap of supposed evidence, every testimony, every planted clue had been arranged with meticulous care, each piece sliding neatly into place to paint him as guilty. Yet it all fit together too perfectly, too smoothly to be coincidence. Someone had engineered the entire spectacle to unfold at the exact moment Boone rode home. "The cellar," Boone said at last, his tone grim and unyielding. "Show me before they arrive." Wade led the way behind the house, toward the planked entrance Boone had ignored for years. The wood was not the weathered gray he remembered, but fresh, the iron hinges glistening with oil. Someone had been tending to this passage while he was away, keeping it in working order. Wade heaved the boards aside, and at once a smell rose from below, not the dry musk of forgotten storage, but something disturbingly fresh. The tang of lamp oil, the faint acrid curl of tobacco, and the unmistakable odor of human habitation. Sterling pressed a lantern into Boone's hand, and without hesitation he descended the ladder into the earth. The cellar stretched wider than he had imagined, its stone walls enclosing a packed dirt floor. What seized his attention, though, were the signs of deliberate use. A wooden table cluttered with papers. 2 chairs facing each other as though conversations had been conducted here in secret. A heavy trunk resting against the wall filled with possessions Boone had never seen before. Ayanna followed him down, her breathing unsteady, her eyes wide. "Look at the papers," she whispered. Boone lifted the lantern and leaned over the table. What he saw twisted his stomach into knots. Documents in handwriting he didn't recognize, but written as though in his name. Maps of Apache territories marked with red ink, notes charting movements of tribal groups, lists cataloging treasures stored in sacred sites. It was a ledger of betrayal, a blueprint for dismantling the very people he had sworn to protect. But amid the scattered papers was something that froze him entirely. A letter, addressed to him. The script on the envelope stirred recognition deep within him, though his mind struggled to place it. He broke the seal and read the short message, each line cutting sharper than the last. "Your cooperation has been valuable, but your usefulness is at an end. The final phase begins the moment you return. Your wives and brothers believe your guilt. The authorities are convinced. Your name is ruined. Tomorrow you vanish, and we claim your land and all it holds." At the bottom were initials. W.M. Boone's pulse pounded in his ears as his thoughts raced. He scoured his memory for anyone with those letters, anyone with motive enough to orchestrate such treachery. Before the answer could surface, Takala's voice rang from above, taut with urgency. "They're nearly here. 3 riders armed, closing in fast." Ayanna's hand clamped onto his arm, her grip fierce. "Boone, whoever wrote this, everything was arranged. The papers, the witnesses, the timing. They built this trap around you. You're guilty of nothing, but you've been made the perfect victim." Climbing back toward the fading light, Boone realized with bone-deep dread that the truth itself might not be enough. The riders bearing down on his ranch weren't coming to question him. They were coming to drag him away, condemned for crimes he had not and could not commit, yet had no way to disprove. The thunder of hooves rolled closer, shaking the earth beneath them. Boone's mind clawed through the names again, faster, harder. The answer came with brutal clarity the moment the riders crested the ridge. W.M. Walter Morrison, the banker from town. The man who had hounded him for months to sell the ranch. The man who now had everything to gain from Boone Carter's downfall. Morrison had long insisted the ranch sat atop rich mineral seams, but Boone had turned down every offer to sell. Morrison was a man with deep pockets, the kind of wealth that could grease the palms of officials and pay for counterfeit records. He had access to Boone's finances, his trading patterns, his very livelihood. Still, the method of his deception remained elusive, until Sterling's eyes lit with sudden realization. "The coffee," Sterling muttered urgently. "Every time you came back from trading, Morrison sent a gift, said it was premium beans from back east." The truth crashed into place with merciless speed. The special coffee that had left Boone heavy-limbed, sinking into unnatural slumber. The mornings he woke drained despite long hours in bed. The dreams that lingered with disturbing clarity because they weren't dreams at all. "He drugged me," Boone growled, his voice a blade of fury. "Kept me half-conscious, pliable, able to walk and follow orders without memory." Ayanna's eyes widened, her breath catching as understanding struck. "Those nights when your bed was empty," she whispered, horrified. "You weren't gone by choice. You were moving under his control." Wade moved forward, rifle steady, just as the riders drew near. Boone recognized the lead horseman even before the dust settled. Walter Morrison himself, flanked by 2 hired guns. "Your time is up, Carter," Morrison shouted. arrogance dripping from every syllable. "These men hold a warrant for your arrest. The evidence against you is overwhelming," but Morrison had miscalculated. He had come in person ahead of the officials, revealing his hand too soon. His presence proved direct involvement in the plot. Boone stepped boldly into the yard, his palms open, his voice unshaken. "I found your letter, Morrison." "The one you signed with your own initials, spelling out my destruction." For a fleeting instant, Morrison's mask cracked. His smirk faltered, but then he forced it back. "I don't know what you mean." "I'm here as a good citizen, helping the law take down a traitor." "Show them," Boone ordered. Ayanna raised the letter high, her voice steady as she read the damning words aloud, the confession of betrayal, the plan to seize the ranch. The two men beside Morrison shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between the page and their employer. They weren't officials. They were mercenaries, deceived into thinking this was sanctioned work. Sterling advanced, his voice ringing with unshakable authority. "We've seen your cellar, Morrison. We've found the forged documents, the maps, the lies, and we have your confession in your own hand." One of the gunmen lowered his weapon, his suspicion plain. "Walter, you told us this was official business. You never said a word about forged evidence." Morrison's composure collapsed, his voice climbing in desperation. "They're all liars, protecting a traitor who's been selling secrets for months." His protest only underscored his guilt. Then Takala stepped forward, her tone like steel. "If you're telling the truth, Morrison, explain this. How did you know Boone would return today? How did you know the exact hour to arrive unless you were manipulating his schedule all along?" The careful snare Morrison had set for Boone now twisted shut around him. His own arrogance, his exact timing, his obsession with control left no doubt. The lie unraveled in the open air. But even as Morrison faltered, another shadow loomed over Boone's thoughts. Wade held out a handful of gleaming gold coins, the supposed payment for betrayal. Boone stared at them, forcing his memory to give up some hidden moment, some forgotten exchange that could explain their presence. Nothing came. "I need to hear this from Henrik," Boone said at last, his voice tight. "I need to look him in the eye and know the truth." Sterling's reply struck like a hammer. "That won't happen. He left town this morning. Said he'd done his part by telling us what he saw, but he wouldn't stay to face the rest." Wade slipped the coins back into his pocket, his expression heavy. "He was afraid, Boone. Said a man who could betray his wife's people was capable of anything." The words carved deeper than any wound. Henrik, who had shared food at Boone's table, mended fences at his side, lived as a friend for years, had abandoned him in fear. That betrayal burned colder than steel because it came from a man who had once seemed like family. Ayanna stepped to the edge of the porch, her shoulders squared, her tone calm, but heavy with intent. "There's something else you need to know. Something we found in your saddlebags while you were gone." Boone's chest tightened, his breath catching. "You went through my things?" "We had no choice," Takala answered softly, her voice like a hesitant echo. "After the government man came, after the cellar evidence was uncovered, we had to see if there was more." Wade reached into his coat and drew out a small object that gleamed in the light. A silver compass, polished so bright it reflected like a mirror. On its back, an inscription had been carved, coordinates etched with deliberate precision. Boone froze. He had never laid eyes on it before. "It was wrapped in your spare shirt," Wade said, his voice grim. "Hidden in a way that only someone familiar with how you pack could manage." Boone accepted the compass with unsteady hands. The weight was foreign, the metal biting cold against his skin. He turned it over, staring at the numbers. They meant nothing to him, yet the handwriting of the engraving stirred a nagging recognition he could not place. Ayanna's voice came faint and trembling. "Those numbers lead to Apache burial sites, sacred places. Graves only the elders know of." The words struck harder than a rifle shot. Burial grounds, resting places of ancestors, filled with artifacts no outsider should ever touch. To desecrate them would be to violate the deepest laws of Ayanna's people. Collectors and officials alike would pay fortunes for such knowledge. "I've never seen this compass," Boone said. But even to himself the denial sounded weak, stripped of conviction. Sterling stepped closer, his eyes full of pain. "We want to trust you, brother. But someone is moving in your shadow. Someone who knows your habits, your property, your very life, as if it were their own. And they're using it to ruin you. Takala came forward, her hands small yet steady as they rose to frame his face. "Look at me," she whispered, her eyes locking with his. "Search yourself. Tell me, no strange dreams? No lost hours? No nights when you felt you weren't entirely your own?" Boone's gaze sank into hers as he clawed through his memory. A chill grew inside him. There had been mornings when exhaustion clung to him despite long sleep. Nights when his boots were streaked with mud, though he had no recollection of leaving his bed. And those dreams. Dreams too vivid, too precise, too much like lived moments. "I remember," he admitted at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dreams of walking, of meeting people in the dark. They felt like nightmares, not memories." The look in Takala's eyes deepened into something darker, edged with fear. "What if they weren't dreams, Boone? What if someone has found a way to use you, make you act without knowing, make you live a life in shadows you can't remember?" The words settled over him like a suffocating weight. And nearby, Morrison's hired men shifted uneasily, their suspicion thick in the air. The larger of the two swung down from his saddle, his weapon no longer drawn. His voice carried the cold steel of betrayal. "Walter, you told us this was a simple warrant. An arrest, nothing more. You didn't say a word about conspiracies, or drugged coffee, or forged evidence." His tone was sharp, the kind that came from a man who realized he'd been played. "No one said you were the one orchestrating these crimes." Morrison's horse sidestepped beneath him, restless, as the carefully woven threads of his plan began to unravel. He raised his voice, desperation seeping through his polished veneer. "You're being fooled. Carter is dangerous. He's the criminal here." "Who?" Wade cut him off, his tone cold as steel. He stepped forward, rifle steady, every word deliberate. "Who refused to sell you this land? Who built something honest you wanted to steal?" The second hired gun swung down from his saddle, his boots hitting the dirt with finality. Both men now stood shoulder to shoulder with the Carter family, no longer threatening them but guarding them. Men like them lived by a code. Mercenaries, yes, but not fools. To be used as pawns in a petty vendetta was an insult that could not be tolerated. Boone strode to his saddlebags and retrieved a small cloth pouch, holding it up for all to see. "This is the coffee Morrison sent me last month," he said, his voice sharp with conviction. "The coffee that left me unconscious, open to suggestion, moving like a puppet while thinking I dreamed." He held the pouch out toward the gunman. "Take it to town, test it. Test the residue in my cellar. Every grain holds the truth of what he did to me." Morrison's polished composure fractured, anger spilling out unchecked. "You can't prove a thing. It's my word against his. I'm a respected man in this community." "Your word against ours?" Ayanna countered quietly, her voice steady but unyielding. She lifted the damning letter, Morrison's own words etched in his hand. "And against the proof you signed yourself." The larger of the hired men stepped to Morrison's side, his expression carved from stone. "Walter Morrison, by rights of citizen's arrest, you're charged with conspiracy, fraud, and whatever else these folks decide to bring against you. We'll be delivering you to the sheriff personally." Sterling came to stand beside Boone, no longer aiming his rifle at his brother, but prepared to defend him instead. His eyes narrowed on Morrison. "The real question is why you wanted this land so desperately you'd ruin a man's life to get it." Morrison's last attempt came in panic. He dug his heels into his horse, trying to bolt, but the gunmen were quicker. With practiced efficiency, they dragged him from the saddle, binding his wrists tight with rope pulled from their own gear. His struggles meant nothing now. As the conspirator was secured, Boone felt the crushing weight of suspicion, fear, and betrayal finally begin to lift. Takala approached him, her steps slow, her gaze full of apology. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her hands trembling as they brushed against his chest. "I'm sorry we believed the lies. Sorry we barred you from your own home." Boone drew both his wives close, their warmth pressing into him, their trust flooding back like cool water over scorched ground. "Morrison was cunning," he said softly. "He spun a trap from the people closest to me because he knew how deeply I loved them. That's why it all seemed so real. Wade joined them, his face heavy with remorse. "Brother, we should have trusted you from the start. We should have known you'd never betray anyone, least of all your wife's people." The hired men remounted, Morrison bound tightly between them. "We'll see he makes it to the sheriff," the larger one called over his shoulder. "And the whole town will hear the truth of what happened here today." As their figures rode off in a cloud of dust, the silence of the land returned. Boone stood in the yard, his eyes sweeping over the property, his home, his family. Everything Morrison had tried to steal remained intact, stronger than before. The afternoon sun dipped lower, stretching long shadows across the earth where betrayal had nearly destroyed him. Ayanna slipped her hand into his, her fingers lacing with his own. Her smile was soft but resolute. "Welcome home, husband. Truly this time,